Now, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, City Society, as we present the third in our series of What to Know. This one is What to Know About Building Maintenance. I do not claim to be an expert about it, and so therefore I brought in someone who is an expert. And we are very happy to welcome Michael Chirigos, who has become a valuable friend to the United Methodist City Society as well as the churches. Michael is a licensed architect registered in New York State. He is a principal, and I feel like, Michael, I'm going to mess up the name, so you'll correct it. A Rexroad,
Yes.
Rexroad Chirigos architect since 2006. He has more than 30 years of experience, although he only looks to be about 30 years old. Don't know how that's possible. In all aspects of architectural practice for residential, commercial, and institutional clients on a variety of projects of all scales. In addition, Michael is the traditional architectural practice. He has now included providing services as an owner's rep as well as building and waterproofing consultant to Rockefeller University. In 2008, Rexo Chirigos Architect received the New York Landmarks Conservancy Lucy G. Moses Award for the renovation of 135 Gerolamo Street in Brooklyn. Michael finds it especially rewarding to help faith based organizations make the most of their facilities in support of their mission. Michael received a Bachelor of Arts from George Washington University and a Master's of Architect from the University of Texas at Austin. And as I stated, Michael has also become a friend and a valuable resource for City Society. A few of you on here have met Michael when Michael came out to do an assessment of your property and to help you to figure out what the next moves were for repairs. So without further ado, I'm going to step back. I'll have Michael begin his presentation. If you have any questions, we ask that you put them in the chat, and Keyshawn Hill and I will be monitoring the chat, and questions will be asked in at the end of Michael's presentation. Thank you for joining us today. Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I have a presentation. I will share my screen with illustrations of different observations and topics that are addressed that I may comment on during the course of the next 40 minutes or so. One thing I'll say, Reverend asked me if I'd be interested in doing this, if I could do this. I was interested. I said yes. And one thing I realized over the last couple months as I put this together, this lecture is a little less building maintenance, because when you look into facilities maintenance, there's a whole collection of concerns about the mechanical equipment, life safety, lighting, whatnot. I touch on some of that. I will touch on some of that, but what I think is most relevant and what service I provided to the City Society and different churches on sort of consulting basis are more addressing waterproofing issues, leaks, exterior damage that winds up resulting in interior damage. And that's my emphasis here. It's what I see at different churches I visit. And I'm hoping really just to give everybody here a heads up as to conditions that some people may not notice, others may think aren't important, but eventually these are the sorts of problems that will catch up and really handicap you in use of your facility. So in terms of preventive maintenance, the concern here is to halt exterior problems before they lead to interior problems. It can be daunting, both in terms of energy and budget, in terms of addressing roof issues, masonry issues, And people put it off. That's understandable. During the course of what I do, I visit many buildings, not just churches, throughout the New York City area, and almost all of them, even the most well-managed, expensive buildings, typically have spots here and there that should be addressed. It's tough. It really is difficult. You have to make a concerted effort to stay on top of things. Again, I'll emphasize the biggest concern here is water, and whether it's rain or snow melt, starting from the roof, going down the walls, over exterior openings, doors and windows, any sort of louvers, plumbing penetrations, down to the pavement around the building, to the foundation. And if this exterior envelope is not maintained and problems as they developed addressed pretty quickly, it will wind up leading to further damage. So let me start now with the illustrations. This was right here. Hold on. There we are. Some of this I just addressed. The routine supervision and observation, staying on top of things, really is key. And again, the concern here is water. One thing I'll say at the outset is you should think twice before visiting your roofs. I mean, the best way to get a handle on this is to actually go up there, take a look for some of the conditions that I'll touch on in just a moment. But before you do that, churches that have sextons or enthusiastic trustees or volunteers, there may be people that are just fine shape, depending on what their other work is or what their past experience is, have no problem going out on a roof hatch, taking a look around. But don't take that for granted. Assume that whenever you're up on a roof that you're potentially in danger. It always makes sense to be certain of the ladders, any sort of guardrails, be certain that they will actually hold you before you need to grab at something in a panic. And depending on who's available, what your own abilities are, these may be jobs better left to hiring somebody from the outside who's experienced. And it doesn't have to be a design professional. It could be a contractor or a roofer. Depending on your relationship, don't assume that they're just angling for a job. See if somebody can lend a hand and be a benefit to your congregation, to your church. Starting at the roof, one thing that I see so often on flat roofs, people use them for storage or garden areas for whatever reason. Don't do that. It just even with the best intentions, walking on a roof regularly is not good. And as soon as you start to put things up there, big storm, something gets knocked over, debris gets blown out of flower pots, you wind up with clogged roof drains, gutters. There's a roof drain that's accumulated leaves just from the surrounding trees. It's important that drains and gutters drain, that they actually do drain. If you're able to, if anything's in question, get a hose up there and see that they flow easily, that they don't wind up ponding, creating little bathtubs on the roof. Roofs are not meant to hold water. They're meant to shed the water, even flat roofs. Water that's held, especially during freeze thaw, will eventually degrade the roof. It needs to be avoided. Here's a roof. I mean, you see a lot here that's past its useful life. Rusted flashings, heaved seams, alligatoring. This means that the membrane is degraded, starting to crack. Missing roof coping, parapet copings, even though this may seem solid enough, I don't think there's any danger structurally here. The terracotta coping, or sometimes sheet metal copings or stone copings, shed water. Here, this will absorb water and eventually start to degrade the mortar. And with enough moisture, enough rain, will eventually find its way to the inside.
Michael, I know I said we're gonna hold questions to the end, but I feel like I
Yeah.
need to ask this question.
Yes.
What exactly is a coping?
Coping is a covering. So covering on top of the wall. Here again on older buildings, this is made of clay, vitreous clay, terracotta, has a bit of a glaze to it. These are commonly find these on top of half the buildings in Brooklyn, all over the place. And here, the one at the end, for whatever reason, came off. Either it wasn't bedded properly, or somebody getting up on the roof maybe grabbed onto it, shook it loose, and the benefit, concern for safety, removed it. All well and fine, except over time, again, this will get saturated by water and lead to problems down the road. This should be obvious to anybody. Actual shingles that are missing need to be addressed. That can happen during storms. Over time, shingles get brittle, terrible winds come along on the right storm, and you will lose shingles. Here's some conditions to look out for: ruin mastic along the flashing. This was titled "The Snow Guards." In terms of safety, pitched roofs, particularly, and again, this is church roofs are a real problem where you have a steep pitch, and slate, which is slippery. You wind up with a hard snow. It's cold enough that the snow settles there, but then once things start to warm, it'll slide off. I think everybody has seen this. Then you get a big icy sheet of snow that slides down quite often right at an entrance or alongside a sidewalk. Snow guards can prevent that, let the snow melt gradually over time rather than slide off the roof in a big mass. Again, going back to some of the previous slides, debris on the roof. You can see how the roof pitches. The water runs down along here. There's the roof drain covered with leaves and debris. Gutters. When gutters get clogged with leaves, two things can happen. Water will build up and go underneath the shingles. There could be also snow can cause this condition. Water creeps up under, will eventually lead to damage at the interior. And even if it doesn't go back under, once it overflows, once you have water cascading down the face of a building, doors and windows are not meant to resist water like that. When the water, again, cascades down over their heads, saturates the sills, over time, again, we're talking decades in terms of these church buildings, that adds up. The damage creeps into the interior. As far as the interior, keeping an eye on things, one thing that can generally be done a little more safely than looking at the outside of the roof is looking at the underside of the roof. And here, if you see stains, this is water damage from the outside that came in, then you know that there's a problem. One thing I see frequently, you go up into the rafter space, eave area of a roof, you can see light. If you see light, you know that you have a problem. Either along walls, along masonry walls, which means that there's something happening where the roof meets the wall, flashing is deteriorated, something's come undone, or sometimes through the roof, particularly shingle roofs. You know that you need to take action. Steeples, the louvers, bird screens, again, I think anybody who's visited, you see the pigeon feces, nested birds. Aside from it's a health problem. It's a health hazard, potentially a hazard. And more of the same, things that are past their useful life. So coming down off the roof, rainwater conducted by downspouts and conductors. What'll happen here, whatever water does find its way to the gutter and down the downspout, then splashes against the side of the building onto the pavement because its downspout is detached from the storm sewer. Here's another one. You can see the puddle here, and this is a church that had significant foundation water damage. What happens so often are that the conductors to the storm sewer get clogged with debris. A relatively easy fix, maybe not inexpensive because these are big lines and frequently go for quite some distance underground, but they can be snaked. Roto-Rooter is able to do that. Generally a plumber who does more than just install fixtures and whatnot is equipped with a powerful enough snake to clear lines like that. Worst case is that over time, there's been a little foundation settling, or that when the conductor has been filled with water during the freeze-thaw cycle in the fall, water is close enough to the surface that very, very cold temperatures can cause it to freeze. The pipes crack, and then the rainwater that's going down here, if it's not backing up because it's clogged, is actually saturating the soil beneath. These should be tested. The last thing you should do is disconnect the downspout and just let the water splash to grade. Talking about water coming down the face of a building, I think this stone ledge here shedding water from an upper roof over the years, cascading against the brownstone of this buttress. You can see how it started to degrade. This is, again, both a waterproofing and a life safety concern. Once a stone starts to get wet like this, moisture will find itself into the interior. But beyond that, you have to look out for things flaking off and falling onto people down below. Bricks are the same. You'll see, particularly along parapet walls and whatnot, damaged brick masonry, which is in danger of falling. It's not uncommon to observe that in older churches. And I think this is sort of the gist of what I want to hammer home here, is that when you have exterior waterproofing problems, you can see the degraded mortar here, cracked brick. I think what happened here is that there was an open seam on this gutter. Water overflowed, again, during very hard storms. And this location of this interior damage corresponds almost exactly to the spot on the exterior of this church. And this is not uncommon. This is a very clear illustration. But I have I could probably find this in a dozen different churches that I have photographs of on record. Again, pavement's the same way in terms of cracks. Anything that admits water will rest against the foundation, and then at the interior you'll wind up with badly decomposed mortar at the whether the wall is stone or brick. A repair that could be avoided if the water wasn't getting in through cracks. Ivy should be removed. It leaches lime out of mortar and eventually will result in premature need for repointing and masonry repairs. Painting, again, similar to openings at roofs, and problems with masonry. Once the paint starts to go, water will saturate paint and sealant. Joints around window openings, door openings, dry out, needs to be replaced over time. If it's neglected, it creates an opening for water to get in. And I think everybody here has probably visited a church, or whether it's a residence, whatever sort of building, seen water damage around the interior window and door openings. It can be avoided. In addition here to wood windows that need to be, these probably could still be restored, scraped and painted. Actual broken windows, I see this frequently, and it's tough with the stained glass. It really is. It's an expensive repair. Sometimes it's easier to cover the opening. Regardless of how you go about it, ignoring a broken window doesn't make it go away. Some of my notes here, again, you have big facilities. A lot of the windows, a lot of the different walls, the churches have so many different little nooks and crannies at the exterior. A lot of the stuff is not easily observed or isn't looked at in the course of regular day in, day out. It's very common for me, because I'm looking thoroughly at these buildings, to find windows that are open, sashes that don't shut completely, weather stripping, something that's bent, a piece of hardware that's bent that prevents the window from closing properly. And that's another point of entry for wind-blown rain or water that may cascade down the face of the wall because you have a problem with the gutters or drains up above. I would suggest making a checklist, and twice a year, around now, sometime toward the end of the summer, beginning of the fall, going around and checking the condition of all your openings, in addition to looking at the roof. The roof, start to sound boring here, but the roofs and roof drains are the biggest concern. But then beyond that, windows and door openings, check that out around this time of year so you can prepare for inclement weather. And then check again in the spring, once we've gotten through the most harsh conditions that we have here in our area, our part of the country, and see if anything took a beating and needs to be addressed after winter storms. Things get old, they don't keep the weather out. See the sunlight coming through here. This was an effort stopgap. One thing that I see, actually, and again, it's understandable, people trying to, even if it's short term, band-aid type approach, try and correct things from the interior. That doesn't work. And it's understandable because it's safer, it's easier to access. Putting plastic up on the inside, it might provide some insulative value if it's a good opening, if the window is secure, if you don't have problems with broken panes or whatnot. Yes, a piece of stretch plastic or a temporary. I've seen some plywood cutouts to fit openings people put in when it's very drafty to cut down on heating costs during winter. That's well and fine. But if there's anything, again, that's deficient at the exterior, that's going to admit water, putting plastic up like this or some of the other fixes I've seen that I just mentioned don't do you any good, and in fact may even be detrimental. It makes it more difficult for things to dry out once the rains have stopped. I make a note here. One of the concerns, aside from maintenance in terms of damage, people are worried about security. It's understandable. Again, hardware starts to fail over time. Doors get knocked out of square. They just take abuse if it's a heavily traveled area. And sometimes people may be well-meaning, but they'll chain the doors or put a lock on the interior. You can never do that. Even if you feel that the number of visitors you have to the church, the number of congregants on a weekend, you think that some of the, and I've had people explain this to me. They say, oh, we don't need to use those doors. Everybody can just go through the main entrance or whatnot. You never know what may happen in terms of an emergency, a fire or some other panic incident. Doors have to be kept operable, even if they don't serve you regularly. Steel lintels, problem spot in newer buildings. Things start to rust. Rust expands, and then the problem starts to compound. It gets worse over time.
Michael, before you go into cracked pavement and paving, I'm interrupting because you've shared so much right now already about the exterior and the concerns. And I thank you for the suggestion of creating a checklist and doing this twice a year inspection. In the United Methodist Church, our trustees are supposed to do an inspection of the property. But this definitely seems more of an investigative type of inspection. And I'm just wondering, when should we really bring professionals in to do this inspection? I mean, it'd be great if every board of trustees had someone who was a local architect, right? But that's not always the case. And so, when is it beneficial to do that, so that we're not a penny wise and a pound foolish?
Again, hopefully people have some familiarity, either as homeowners or working. You mentioned the trustees. People, somebody who's a trustee who might volunteer for this has some familiarity or interest in buildings. Painting, I think generally people can use their own discretion. Assume when things start to blister, peel, and crack, that you need to paint. If you bring a contractor in to get bids, hopefully they come recommended, or it's somebody that you have history with, who can say, yeah, this is a relatively straightforward paint job. We need to scrape and paint, minor prep work. And if it's not that they're honest with you at the outset, and they point out, these are too far gone, that there's carpentry work here that might be needed. And I think as soon as the overall scope, as soon as the effort becomes maybe not what you were planning, or comes in question, then I think it makes sense to get in touch with an architect or an engineer, or somebody else. I mean, those would be the two biggest categories to cover that. You might have a facilities consultant, depending on, again, who you're introduced to, who somebody on the trustees might know. But to come in and give a disinterested opinion as to the best way forward, whether in fact you need to be thinking window replacement, or so that you're not taken advantage of. Or one thing that I find often is not that contractors are necessarily dealing in bad faith. It's that they get used to certain things. They become familiar with, oh yeah, don't worry about that. We just put a little liquid wood or Bondo on there, and then we can move forward. Yes and no. I mean, sometimes they're trying to do you a favor. Sometimes they're trying to keep the job within their own realm, rather than have you bring a contractor in beyond a painter. And I'm just talking about painting now. Roofs. Again, I think whenever you see water damage at the exterior, if you see clogged roof drains, and you have somebody in-house who's capable of going up there and just throwing the leaves over the side of the roof, scraping away whatever debris is decomposed and caused soil in effect to gather around. If you can clean that off, somebody's able to get a hose up there, even make sure that things are relatively clear. And if you have things backing up, then it's time to bring somebody else in. Missing shingles, again, I would, before you go and hire a roofer, I think then you would bring somebody in to determine whether or not the damage is greater than what's apparent, and to help you put together a list of instructions to a contractor, so that hopefully the problem's addressed correctly, and either again, somebody doesn't just go about this in a way that they're familiar with and miss things, or worst case, take advantage of it. I guess it's tough for me to be completely clear qualitatively. Again, I think it's more a matter of what it looks like when it exceeds what you would consider normal upkeep.
But and since I've already broken my own rule about questions
Yeah.
held till the end.
Yeah.
Reverend Wendy Modest put in the chat, Michael, do you recommend gutter cover?
Yeah, I think so. It depends. I don't know how effective they are. I've seen one thing that happens. They need to be maintained. They need to be observed and maintained. You can't just put the gutter guard up there and assume that you're done, because they do get clogged. I've seen that. People wonder why there's a problem. Well, you go, we have screens over the gutters. You go, you sure do, and the screens are covered with leaves. Based on the pitch of the roof, it wasn't enough to wash debris over time. Things grab on there and collect. It's certainly, especially where you have a lot of trees, where that you have that nuisance. I think the money spent on gutter guards can make it less likely that you're going to wind up with clogged gutters. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Again, this goes beyond just being unsightly, or maybe even unsafe, depending on somebody could trip on this stuff. These cracks, water that's going to collect on this pavement. Again, it looks here, I'm pretty certain at this church, water spilled over time, foundation settled a little bit, just the tiniest bit. Because all this is paved, whatever water splashes down onto here and flows against the wall of the building, gets into the crack adjacent to the exterior wall, and you wind up with water problems down below, interior problems. I was going to skip over this. Oh, although the one thing I will point, do not use salt for snow and ice removal. It's corrosive, and it's actually plainly obvious. Places that use salt over time, you look at exterior fences, metal doors, tread plates on stairs, anything that's in regular contact with salt. You'll see the areas down near sidewalks and places where the salt is scattered are rusted and deteriorated. Further up the stairs, maybe under a roof, further up the door frame, where salty water does not sit, there's no damage. There's no question. I'm just pointing this out for your own, if you need proof, immediate proof yourself, generally it's pretty easily found at different older buildings. So here, whole effort of addressing exterior problems, keeping water out, you wind up with interior damage, plaster finishes, paint finishes, wood at the interior, wood trim. It can be avoided if you're able to fix the exterior in time. One thing I note here, it's not always exterior leaks. I'll come to this in a bit, but steam leaks, plumbing, plumbing pipes, stuff like that will also contribute to interior damage. Yeah. Up and wrap. I don't want to be alarmist. A lot of these buildings are so old. In the first decade or so after their construction, things settle a little bit. It's not uncommon to see cracks, cracking a beam here. Keep an eye on things. If again, hopefully somebody's able to visit here once or twice a year, make a note. One thing I've done in the course of investigating is put a piece of tape or a pencil line over cracks so that when I come back a year later, I can see if things have shifted at all. This is a extreme case of damage at a foundation due entirely to water from the exterior. This photo showed up previously. Again, looking for moisture damage, pigeon infestation. Water damage came through the brick. Windows that are damaged. With older buildings, stained glass in particular, it's not insulated glass. Temperature and humidity differential between the interior and the exterior, you'll get condensation. So it's not necessarily leaks from the exterior that will cause this damage. If you get enough condensation winter after winter, paint will start to fail. Water sits on the sills, and it needs to be addressed. Over time, wood will rot. It gets to a point where it can't easily be prepped and restored, and you're looking at a bigger expense down the road.
Michael, is there an assumption that in these older buildings, is it safe to assume that the paint will contain lead?
Yeah, I couldn't tell you exactly when. I can also tell you, I've had people tell me based on the appearance of different things. They say, "Oh, that's lead paint. That's not lead paint." It is very, very difficult to tell. It doesn't matter if the paint has a sheen on it. Lead paint is more likely to. It's over time it becomes more brittle. It's likely to crack and flake into smaller and more pieces than a latex paint would. But based on the age of these buildings, I think you have to assume that there's lead paint in some locations throughout, maybe not everywhere. Paint removal, lead paint removal is something that you should not do yourself, or at the very least, it should not be done in a dry method. It shouldn't be scraped and sanded. But the larger pieces of lead, the problem is when it's inhaled, or in the case of little kids, when it's ingested. Larger pieces, as long as it's not airborne and you're not eating it, it's not ideal, but it may not be an overwhelming health hazard. Problems around window openings, window sashes. If they're open and closed, it starts to create dust. That's one spot to be on a lookout for. pigeon infestation. One thing, clearing up foundation, moisture problems at the foundation and in cellars will help keep the rats away. Rats need water. Unfortunately, mice don't. Mice can survive based on whatever they're eating, seeds, and as long as it has a little moisture in it, they can get by without actual water to drink. But rats need water to feel at home. So here's some in terms. This is more of a maintenance issue, not waterproofing. Different buildings I visit, some parsonages, places that have dryer vents. They need to be kept clear. It's one, it's inefficient. The dryer works harder, and two, then it becomes a safety hazard. This is a spot things get hot enough, or there's a problem elsewhere in terms of spark or flame. The lint is flammable. My notes here: flexible ducts are problematic. They are. They're more likely to hold and accumulate lint. They're easier to install, but if it comes time to make a repair or do an initial installation, the less flexible duct you use, the better. One thing to look out for, I mentioned keeping doors, making sure that your doors are not chained shut, that they're fully functioning and able to be used as exits. Makes sense to always confirm that your exit signs are working. Emergency lighting. Newer emergency lighting fixtures have a little red light adjacent to them that should always be glowing. That also functions as a test button. If you were to press that, it should tell you that that the battery backup on an exit sign or on one of the remote head egress emergency lights is charged and will function. Smoke detectors, again, I think are obvious. Although I'll say though, I guess in the church buildings where somebody's not present all the time, it is possible for them to sound their battery warning that they're going dead. And if somebody's not around for several days, that could exhaust itself, and you may not know. So in terms of checking on things, especially in out of the way areas, it makes sense to press the test button and be certain that the thing is functioning. Here we are. Some churches I visit have really pretty well equipped, even if they're older, community rooms and kitchens that they use regularly. And frequently these are equipped with what's called an Ansel fire extinguishing system, all the little nozzles over the range and oven. Those need to be maintained. Greasy cooking will accumulate and clog those jets. By law, I think Ansel systems need to be checked at least annually. I don't want to place a burden on people, but my point is to be attentive to them, especially the kitchens that are used regularly. If it's an important part of your functioning, of your mission, it may make sense for you to do what's right and have them checked and maintained. Plumbing's a tough one. I mean, older buildings, older pipes, they're expensive repairs. I'm not talking about just the trap beneath the sink or a leaking flush valve at a toilet. Over time, pipes need to be replaced. Keep your eye out for leaks.
The ceiling is currently right?
One thing, mechanical equipment. what did I want to mention here? Sorry, let me come back to buildings that have everybody would like to have air conditioning. It's a tough one in terms of expense, but if you do have it, you're well served to have a maintenance contract with either the company that did the initial installation, or you could shop around for different proposals, and they will come and clean the equipment twice a year. They will replace filters. Replacing the filters is not necessarily a difficult thing to do, but again, if you're relying on volunteers, or if somebody is attending to all the other functions that you need to keep track of in terms of keeping sidewalks clear, emptying the trash and whatnot, it's an easy to put out of mind. Changing the filters, keeping them clean, again, will result in greater energy efficiency and put less wear and tear on the equipment. You'll get longer service life out of air handlers and associated mechanical equipment, fans, exhaust fans. It's worth stating, keep an eye on your radiators. The pressure relief valves do fail over time, and when they do, they'll result things. If they fail open and wind up with steam and condensation coming out, they don't shut off, and you wind up with water damage where things leak. Or if they happen to seize shut, they won't admit steam into the radiator, and you'll have a cold spot. You won't be getting heat to that particular radiator.
Michael, is that a plumber would be able to do that?
Yeah, again, I think these really just screw in and screw out. You can buy them at a hardware store, but if you have a plumber who needs to come in for other work, you could ask them to attend to that. It's something that needs to be looked at during the heating season in order to tell whether or not they're functioning. And you can't replace it when the radiator's on. You have to use the shut-off valve, otherwise steam will come out and burn you. But if somebody's relatively handy, these can be replaced by a layperson. The other point of failure is the actual shut-off valve. Again, steam, the heat, the metal expands and contracts. Over time, the seals go bad, and you start to get leaks at the other end of the radiator. And again, hopefully that's self-evident. If somebody's attentive during the course of the day while the heat comes on and off, you should have a sense of whether or not things are up to snuff. Electrical is not anything to fool with on your own. It may not be as cumbersome or as tool-centric as plumbing, but you put your screwdriver in the wrong place at the right time and wind up with big problems. One thing I see frequently are missing covers to junction boxes, plates. They need to be replaced, put in place or replaced. I would refer to an electrician for this. Asbestos pipe insulation that looks like corrugated cardboard. Generally, if you see an open end, you can see the little tubes filled with white material, with white clay. That is asbestos insulation. When it gets to when it's something like this, when it's compromised, when it's torn, this is a health hazard. This is a true concern. This should be removed. Even when it's fully intact, it may not pose an imminent safety hazard, although I think on erring on caution, you could say that it is. Having asbestos around generally is not a good thing. Asbestos insulation. Asbestos floor tile is a little different, but I'm concentrating here on the insulation. Nonetheless, even if it's not in a condition which could cause asbestos dust to float throughout the space, you should have it removed. And one of the reasons, aside from life safety, and I've told several churches, I've experienced this on projects other than churches, is that if you have insulation in place and you have a plumbing emergency or you have an electrical emergency, utilities won't come in and service that if there's asbestos in place. What they will do instead is cut your service off at the street. If let's say your water meter fails and you have water gushing in, they will not come in and trace this back to wherever the leak might be. Instead, they're going to go to the curb box and shut the water off. Same with, I've had this happen with electrical work as well. Big main fuse box failed in a building, and in order to get to it, there was asbestos in the way, and Con Ed would not do the work. So especially these older buildings that you have, I think that not only do you have the benefit of protecting individuals who are in the building from long-term health problems, it makes it much easier to address other construction work or potential emergencies if the asbestos has been removed. That's definitely a job for, unfortunately, it's not inexpensive, but that's a job where you have to hire somebody who is licensed and qualified to perform that work. That's actually the end. So I don't know if there are other questions, or if you have questions now you'd like to pose, please let me know.
Keyshawn,
Michael, I have two questions for you from two of our participants. The first question is from Lance Carlisle, who asked, is there something that can be used other than salt to make slippery surfaces safe to walk on?
Absolutely. I mean, there's the product calcium chloride, is the white pellets. Another one too, I forget the actual generic name, but there are a couple snow melt products that are not salt. And then the other thing, depending on the extent, you can use sand, just grit, so that you have a little traction. It can create a nuisance to the interior, but people are presumably have slush and dirty snow on their boots and shoes when they come in anyway. But if nothing else is available, sand can be used as for safety. It won't get rid of the ice, but it'll make it safer to walk on. But the white pellets, the white flakes will lower the freezing point, make it easier for things to melt in 20-degree weather, make it easier to get a little wet surface beneath it so that it can be peeled away with a shovel and broom. It's the same as salt, but without the corrosion.
Thank you. The second question that I have is from Reverend Wendy. She says that some churches have plexiglass over the stained glass windows to try to protect the windows. Does that cause the stained glass to crack?
I don't think it would cause the stained glass to crack. What it does do, though, and sometimes this is the best choice of several not great choices. In order to, you have to screw into the frame. You have to, attach. And again, I'm presuming this is at the exterior. At the interior, it's really not doing you any good. It may put a halt to any sort of draft, but it's not going to halt any damage to the window or to the interior. In order to fasten that in place, there's generally a little sacrificial damage you need to do in terms of installing screws into the window frame or into the adjacent masonry. Stained glass windows really are a problem. All those little pieces come together. All the little pieces of glass, all the lead mutton and caming. That's the term you use for the little T-shaped pieces of metal that hold the glass in place. And then all of that comes together. Either some of the stained glass windows have operable sashes, so a more robust piece of metal, a piece of steel, in some cases aluminum that's on a hinge and leading all the way out to the frame of the window. And all that stuff reacts differently to temperature. If the day starts out 40 degrees, winds up at 5 degrees, 10 degrees later that evening, all that material moves at a different rate, and things start to open up, and sometimes the glass will crack. I've seen that happen. They are very, very attractive. Everybody expects to see stained glass in a church. I hope all houses of worship continue to have stained glass, but they will always be a maintenance problem. So, yeah.
Thank you. And then I have a comment from Tiffany French, who stated that a lot of our churches still have asbestos floor tiles in the buildings.
Yeah.
How concerned should they be? I know that you mentioned a part of that earlier where you were saying it was more so of a concern in the wall.
Absolutely. The problem with asbestos is when it gets in your body. And the most common way it gets in your body is through the air. And asbestos insulation, the powder that's used, is extraordinarily lightweight. And it can be just the convection from the steam pipes going on or off and on. The hot air will make that stuff travel when the insulation is torn or broken. The tiles are a different animal. It's hard, it's in place. You see areas where on stairs where it gets worn away, when that glossy surface starts to get abraded. You can imagine people's feet, dozens of shoes crossing over it, might start to cause a little bit of debris to come off of it. But generally, if the tiles are in place, they're not cracked, they're not abraded, and unless you have other renovation concerns, I feel confident saying you can leave them alone. If there's a reason to do work in the area, to change your flooring, or you want to spruce the whole place up, get them out. Absolutely. And again, that is, even though I've described it that it's asbestos in a form that's not as dangerous as the insulation is, legally that's a job that has to be done by somebody who is qualified and licensed to remove the floor tile. The problem is when you remove it, you start to chisel at it, pull it up with a shovel or with a hammer, then it breaks and it becomes potentially hazardous. And it has to be disposed of in a way that won't lead to dispersing asbestos debris into the environment. That's why you have to hire a specialized contractor for that sort of thing.
Thank you, Michael. Are there any other questions? Is there anyone who didn't put something in the chat, perhaps that has popped up, that you may want to ask? And sometimes I know sometimes people have questions after the fact. And if that is so, Michael, are you willing to
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
email
Yeah.
you?
Yeah.
Okay. So I will put Michael's email address in the chat for you. And as I said, Michael has often times when a church has applied for a grant with City Society for capital improvement, the practice became that we would send Michael out first to make an assessment and to help the church come to a final conclusion as to the priorities of the repairs that they need to have made. Michael, I see Duncan C. You unmuted yourself. Does anyone
Yes,
have a question?
I do. In terms of asbestos tiles,
Yes.
if they are worn, would the option to cover it to use the new tiles over asbestos rather than disturbing them? Like
That
ceramic
actually,
tile?
yes, it is. Yeah, there is, and I have not done this recently, but in New York City, and I assume this is still the case. I don't want to make it sound like it's been decades since I've done that. It hasn't been. But you could be given the option of what they call encapsulating it. So over the flooring, there are permitted means. I believe it involves putting sheet plastic down over the existing tile, and then on top of that, putting a new subfloor, whether that's plywood or some sort of cementitious material
Mhm.
that you can put the tile on top of that, and then it's presumed that the asbestos is separated from the occupiable space.
Yeah.
I do work in different apartment buildings. Some buildings permit you steam pipes. If you're doing work and you open walls and there are steam pipes with asbestos insulation on them, they permit you to re-enclose the pipes, leave well enough alone. There, which is legal. There are other buildings, though, as soon as you see the asbestos and they're aware of it, even if the wall is going to be rebuilt, you know, drywall, whatever that interior finish may be, is going to be rebuilt and close those pipes off again, irregardless. Once the asbestos is visible and known to be present, they make you remove it. I hesitate. I know that church budgets are so tight. My advice again, get rid of it, but I could understand why there might be circumstances, particular installations where it's less expensive, less work, less effort to properly keep it in place.
Thank you. Well, Michael, our time together has been well spent. We thank you so much for taking the time to share this information and to make us even more aware of the things that we need to be aware of when it comes to our church buildings. The reality also is that in New York City, many churchgoers do not live in a home. They're
Yeah,
living in
yeah,
apartment buildings,
yeah.
right? And so building maintenance doesn't mean the same thing to them as it does to a homeowner. So this is very insightful. And I have to tell you, I used to just think, oh, the ivory on the building is so beautiful. Why would you take it off? But now I understand why, in terms of how it can cause deterioration of
Yeah, I guess yeah, again, I try and use. I really one of the things I find rewarding. I work practice is very broad range, but working for the churches, I think just in terms of um, you know your concerns, what you contribute, I find that rewarding. That guarantee not all our clients are altruistic, but beyond that, the church buildings themselves. That's one reason why in my little biography I mentioned the Lucy Moses Award. It's a historic preservation award. It's considered. It is the big enchilada of preservation awards in the metropolitan area. Very proud of having won that, and it's because and one of the rewards of working on the churches are, a lot of these are really striking buildings, and I'm not suggesting I'm hoping I didn't suggest through what I say here that things need to be redone in a way that's cheap or that all the really sort of beauty in these things needs to be removed in order to solve the waterproofing problems. Hopefully things can be restored. That's one reason to do the maintenance before it gets to the point where you have to make a decision about whether or not you keep that stained glass window or not. And Ivy's the same way. I mean, there's so many places where it really is picturesque, but I'd say you use your discretion. If it's not contributing much to how people regard the facility and what it means to them when they think of their church, you're better off getting rid of it.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you to all of you for joining us today. And I hope that you learned something today that you didn't know before you logged on to this webinar. And that if you have any questions, I put Michael's email in the chat. And as always, we here at City Society are looking to be available to you, to be able to offer services such as Michael. It's kind of like the small grant that we do offer that oftentimes helps in larger ways than just the money. because it does give you a priority of repairs. So may the Lord bless you and may the Lord keep you. I hope all of you who are on here have received your invitation to the 185th Gala, which will be taking place on October 19th at the Marina Del Rey in the Bronx. And if you have not, then we will surely share the invite with you. Take care. God bless and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.